Right now, you are living inside a system built by people whose name you were probably never taught in school. The 60 seconds in every minute, they invented that. The 360 degrees in a circle, they calculated that. The first city, the first written law, the first school, the first library, all of them came from the same civilization. And then, around 4,000 years ago, they disappeared so completely that for 2,000 years, the entire world forgot they had ever existed. Their name was the Sumerians. And this is the story of who they really were, where their blood went, and why their DNA is still living inside people walking on this earth today. Before we go further, drop in the comments right now, where in the world are you watching from? Because by the end of this video, your answer might matter more than you think. So let's start with something that should not be possible. Every single language spoken by humans on Earth belongs to a family. English, Arabic, Persian, Hindi, all connected, all traceable. You can follow the roots backward through centuries and find where languages split and where they came from. Except one. Sumerian is what linguists call a language isolate. It has no parent language, no sister language, no relatives, anywhere, on Earth. And here is what makes that even stranger. When the language first appears in the archaeological record, around 3,500 BCE, it is already fully developed. Complex grammar, rich vocabulary, advanced writing. There is no simple early version, no primitive early stage. It appears fully formed, like someone turned on a switch. Geneticist Dr. Razib Khan, a population geneticist from the United States who has written extensively on ancient DNA, described the Sumerians as, and I'm quoting him directly, arguably the first historic nation, the first self-conscious ethnic group operating by the rules of literate civilization. And yet, he says, their true origin is still one of the deepest unsolved questions in all of human genetics. A civilization this powerful, a language this sophisticated, and zero clues about where either of them came from. A language with no family, a people with no known origin, and a DNA test that was about to change both. In southern Iraq, deep in the wetlands where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers meet the sea, lives a community called the Marsh Arabs. In Arabic, they call themselves Al-Madan, the people of the marshes. For centuries, the mainstream Iraqi society dismissed them, called them outsiders, said they were latecomers who arrived late in history, probably from India, brought by traders who introduced water buffalo and rice farming to the region. They were treated as foreigners in their own land. Then, in 2011, a geneticist named Dr. Nadia Al-Zahari, working at the Institute of Genetics and Biophysics in Naples, Italy, published a study that changed everything. She tested 143 Marsh Arab men, Y chromosome DNA, mitochondrial DNA. She compared it against large samples of Iraqi populations and neighboring regions. Her paper was published in BMC Evolutionary Biology, a peer-reviewed scientific journal. What she found ended the outsider narrative permanently. The dominant Y chromosome haplogroup in the Marsh Arab population was J1 page 08, a genetic branch whose expansion date, calculated through molecular clock analysis, aligns almost precisely with the rise of the Sumerian city-state period roughly 4,000 years ago. Their DNA showed a deep, uninterrupted, purely Middle Eastern ancestry, almost no South Asian signal, almost no African signal, no Central Asian intrusion of any significance. But here is where it gets stunning. Dr. Al-Zahari's study directly demolished the old theory that Sumerians came from India. She wrote, again, quoting directly from her published research, that cultural features like water buffalo breeding and rice farming only marginally affected the gene pool of the autochthonous people of the region. Autochthonous, that means born from this land, native, the indigenous. The Indian migration theory that had been taught in classrooms for 50 years, gone, dead, replaced by something much more powerful. The Marsh Arabs were not outsiders, they were the locals, and the locals, it seems, had been there since Sumer itself. Wait, because what Dr. Al-Zahari found didn't just locate the Sumerians. It destroyed a theory that had been in textbooks for half a century. A Marsh Arab man today builds his home the same way Sumerian builders did 6,000 years ago, woven reeds on water, arched reed halls called mudheaf, no nails, no mortar. He has never had his DNA tested. He doesn't know that the genetic marker flowing through his blood is, according to the best science available, the closest living biological link to the world's first civilization. But then a question appeared that the DNA could not answer on its own. If the Marsh Arabs are genetically Sumerian, why did the culture collapse so completely while the genes survived? Something erased the civilization but spared the people, and that something had a name. The man who began Sumer's erasure did not conquer it with better weapons. He conquered it with something far more dangerous: administration. His name was Sargon of Akkad. He came to power around 2334 BCE, and his origin story, the story he told about himself, was that he had been abandoned at birth, placed in a basket on a river, and raised by someone who found him by chance. You have heard that story before. It appears almost word for word centuries later as the story of Moses. Sargon built the world's first empire. And he did something to the Sumerians that no army could have done alone. He made their language the language of temples, of priests and scholars, while making Akkadian the language of trade, law, and government. 2 languages, 1 civilization, but only one of them had power. Dr. Razib Khan has noted that the Sumerians became, in their own homeland, what Latin became to medieval Europe, a language of educated elites that the common people slowly stopped speaking at home. Archaeologists at the ancient city of Nippur found a school exercise tablet dated to approximately 2100 BCE, where a student was practicing both Sumerian and Akkadian simultaneously, side by side, on the same clay. 2 languages, 1 child. Within a century, only the language on the right side of that tablet would still be spoken by anyone. He didn't destroy them, but he did something worse. Sargon's empire itself collapsed around 2150 BCE. What rose briefly from the ruins was the Ur III dynasty, the Sumerians' last, extraordinary attempt to take back their civilization. It lasted exactly 107 years. And then came the thing that finished them. Not a king, not an army, something that not even the greatest civilization on Earth could fight. In 1993, Dr. Harvey Weiss, archaeologist at Yale University in the United States, published findings that changed how scientists understand civilizational collapse. He had spent years excavating 3 sites in northern Syria, Tel Leilan, Tel Mozan, and Tel Brak. What his team found in the soil were abrupt drought deposits beginning around 2200 BCE, not a short drought, not a single bad season. The rain stopped for 300 years. His conclusions were later confirmed by a separate research team at Northumbria University in the UK, who in 2019 analyzed stalagmite records from a cave in Iran called Gol Izard. The cave had been recording climate history for thousands of years. The records showed 2 massive drought periods. The second one, lasting approximately 290 years, falls precisely at the time of the Akkadian Empire's collapse and the final weakening of Sumerian civilization. Geologist Dr. Matt Confirst of the Bird Polar Research Center in the United States added another layer. His research, presented to the American Geophysical Union, found that during this 4,200-year drought event, approximately 75% of ancient Mesopotamian settlements were abandoned simultaneously, not burned, not captured, just left, empty. The people scattered. And the Sumerians themselves recorded it, not as a geological event, but as the voice of a goddess crying for her city. In the Lament for the Destruction of Ur, a poem written by survivors of Sumer's final collapse, these words were preserved. The large arable tracts yielded no grain. The inundated fields yielded no fish. The irrigated orchards yielded no syrup or wine. The thick clouds did not rain. That is not poetry. That is a weather report written in grief. What you just heard was written 4,000 years ago, and it sounds exactly like a news broadcast from today. The people survived the drought, the genes survived, but the civilization, the language, the schools, the temples, the memory, did not. And when it was all gone, the world moved on so completely that for 2,000 years, not a single human being on Earth knew the Sumerians had ever existed. In 1839, a British diplomat named Austin Henry Layard was riding through the Iraqi desert when he noticed the ground looked wrong. unnaturally angular ridges beneath the sand. He stopped his horse, stepped down, scraped the surface with his boot, found a brick, then another, then a wall. He had just stumbled onto a buried Assyrian palace, but beneath it, deeper than anyone had yet dug, was something older, something the entire world had completely forgotten. What followed over the next 50 years was the most world-changing archaeological discovery in modern history. American excavation teams at Nippur in the 1890s broke open a buried library and found over 30,000 cuneiform tablets in a single room, medical texts, astronomical calculations, with mathematical tables more advanced than anything produced in Europe for the next 2,000 years, all of it sitting in the dry air, perfectly preserved, waiting. And here is the moment that changed religion, history, and scholarship permanently. When a British museum scholar named George Smith translated a Sumerian tablet in 1872, he found a flood story. A man warned by a god to build a boat, his family saved, animals brought aboard, a great flood, the waters receding, a bird sent out to find dry land. The story that billions of people across the world believed was unique and original, had a source text, written in Sumerian, at least 1,500 years before the Book of Genesis. George Smith reportedly stood up from his desk, paced the reading room, and was so overwhelmed he began removing his coat. He had just found the original. Let that land for a second. The rediscovery of Sumer didn't just fill in a missing chapter of history. It revealed that the opening chapter of human civilization had been lost, completely, totally lost, for 2,000 years. And the last living people connected to that chapter were about to face their most modern threat yet. Between 1991 and 2000, the government of Saddam Hussein built a network of dikes, canals, and drainage systems across southern Iraq. Within a decade, 90% of the Iraqi marshes, one of the oldest continuously inhabited ecosystems on Earth, was drained, turned into cracked gray salt flat. The Marsh Arabs, the community whose DNA Dr. Al-Zahari would later confirm as the closest living genetic link to the Sumerians, fell from an estimated 500,000 people to fewer than 20,000. No conqueror in 5,000 years of Mesopotamian history had done this. Not the Akkadians, not the Mongols, who sacked Baghdad in 1258 and reportedly turned the Tigris black with ink from destroyed books. The genetic lineage that had survived Sargon, the 300-year drought, the fall of Ur, and the Mongol invasion, nearly ended in the 1990s at the hands of modern machinery. UNESCO called it one of the greatest environmental disasters of the 20th century. A 1973 satellite image shows a vast, biodiverse green-blue delta filled with life. The same location in the year 2000 shows a lunar gray plain, 9 years. That is all it took. Marsh Arab elders who fled to refugee camps in Iran described watching the water level drop around their floating reed islands, watching their homes sink into the mud as the marshes disappeared. One elder, when documented by Human Rights Watch, said this: "We did not leave. The marsh left us." His Y chromosome haplogroup, had anyone tested him then, was almost certainly J, 1 page 08, Sumerian. After 2003, some marshes were partially reflooded. People came back, began rebuilding. But the ancient traditions, the reed construction techniques, the communal water culture, the oral history, were already disappearing with the elders, being absorbed into Iraqi urban life. At exactly the same speed that Sumerian had once been absorbed into Akkadian 3,000 years earlier, history repeating itself, just with different tools. Now, here is something nobody talked about when the results came in. When geneticists began mapping the full global distribution of the J1 page 08 haplogroup and its parent branch J1M267, well, they expected to find it concentrated in Iraq. What they found instead were scattered clusters of elevated frequency spreading across the Arabian Peninsula, the Levant, southern Iran, and the Caucasus. The Sumerians had sent their DNA outward, in the blood of traders, soldiers, refugees, and migrants, even as their civilization was collapsing around them. And here is where it gets personal for those of you who watched our last video on Persian DNA. The 2022 ancient DNA study from the Max Planck Institute, published in the journal Science, documented what researchers called a West Asian Neolithic continuum. an overlapping genetic layer connecting early Mesopotamian farmers to populations that later became the genetic foundation of the Iranian plateau. The Sumerians and the early Persians share a genetic grandmother. So they were not separate stories. They were the same story, told from two different ends of the same bloodline. And in July 2025, researchers from the Francis Crick Institute and Liverpool John Moores University in the UK published in Nature, one of the most respected scientific journals in the world, the first fully sequenced genome of an ancient Egyptian. Their finding, approximately 20% of that Old Kingdom Egyptian's DNA traced directly to Mesopotamia, to populations from the Sumerian cultural zone. The world's two oldest writing civilizations, Egyptian and Sumerian, were genetically connected, not just through trade, through blood. After our Persian DNA video last week, many of you asked about the Sumerian-Persian connection. Now you have the answer. And I want to know, has your thinking changed? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. There is a site in southern Iraq called Eridu. The Sumerians themselves named it as the first city ever built, the place where civilization was lowered from heaven. Excavations at Eridu have reached layers dated to 5,400 BCE. Below that point, archaeologists stopped, not because there was nothing left to find, but because the water table makes it impossible to dig further with current technology. Whatever is below Eridu is still below Eridu. Dr. Razib Khan has publicly stated that if he could genetically test any ancient people from history, any civilization, he would choose the Sumerians. Not because we have the answer, but precisely because we don't. And he believes that when the answer finally comes, it will rewrite the timeline of human civilization from its very first line. A pending genome study. Drawing on ancient DNA recovered from a northern Mesopotamian excavation site opened in 2019 may deliver that answer. Results are expected within the next 2 years. If those genomes connect cleanly to the J1- page 08 lineage, the Sumerians were not just indigenous to Mesopotamia, they were indigenous to the idea of civilization itself. Or the results will open a question larger than this one, and everything said in this video will have been the introduction. Right now, in the Basra marshes, a woman is teaching her daughter to weave a reed mat. The pattern was taught to her by her grandmother, who learned it from her grandmother, going back in an unbroken chain that neither of them can trace. She is not preserving history. She is simply making a mat. And that is exactly how the most important things survive. We know who built the world, or we know, roughly, where their blood went. We even know the name of the haplogroup, but we do not know, and science may not tell us for another decade, where the Sumerians came from before the marshes, before Eridu, before the first brick was laid. That question is still open, and if you want to be in the room when the answer arrives, you already know what to do. The next episode begins where this one cannot.